it's a fact that India is being gaining prominence as an export hub for many of the MNC OEM associated auto component groups. And that again created an aspirational target of 80 billion by 2026 in the AMP. However, for the same previously said reasons, the industry was able to achieve only a 15 billion in 2021 as against a targeted or aspired 40 billion, and by the 2026 it is likely to hit about 35 billion as against the 80 billion that was aspired.
So while our attendees are pouring in, I'll just quickly begin. Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, automotive, energy, real estate, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 10,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Those leaders among you who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section and will soon be sending invitations to our guests post today's discussion. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Srinath Manda. He's a 20-plus year experienced multi-industry business research, management consulting, and advisory expert with a proven track record of building and scaling up sustainable global business research and management consulting business units by working closely with CXOs and executive board members. In his 15 years of tenure as automotive and transportation industry, where he's done business consulting and advisory practice leader at both MarketsandMarkets and Frost & Sullivan. He guided and supported several Fortune 500 companies, management boards, and CXO teams to understand and translate their strategic priorities into opportunity mapping and actionable insights, followed by hand-holding to realize aspired growth. And for today's discussion, Mr. Srinath Manda will be discussing India Auto Components Outlook and Opportunities. Now I request Mr. Manda to please begin the session. Thank you so much. I don't know where he is. I think he's
Hi, Gautam.
Yeah.
Give me a minute. I'm going to share a screen and then we'll start.
Surely.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, Mr. Manda, we can see you.
Okay. Thank you, Gautam, and welcome to all the fellow Blue Circle members and the participants of this webinar. It's an honor to be part of this session, as well as to share a few of my opinions as well as insights about this industry as a very close observer and a passionate researcher as well as consulting expert of the automotive and transportation ecosystem. Allow me to share my insights, and I'll be glad to take up any of your questions and probably provide my perspective on that topics that you may have. So the topic I wanted to present is broadly the Indian auto components industry outlook and what are the opportunity areas, whether it is a vehicle segment or in terms of product segment or the export markets. So any other drivers that are likely to create the opportunities for this segment. So few of my thoughts I have compiled here. Let's see them. Right. In terms of the revenues, the industry had roughly clocked in about $46 billion for the year FY 2021. So during the period of 2015-16, the industry was almost very aggressive in terms of the forecast as well as the aspirations, considering the fast growth that was witnessed in that last 2-3 years, and it continued, even to 2016-17. So the automotive mission plan that was drafted by the government with inputs from the industry, automotive as well as the components industry, had a very, I would say, an ambitious target of 200 billion to be achieved by 2026. And in that line, the target for the 2021 was about 90 billion. However, due to the overall global automotive industry decline, which also sharply reflected in the Indian market, and the resulting stagnation and the subsequent drastic impact of COVID-19 has actually altered the equations very drastically, and the industry ended up just about at a 50% of what it was targeting. And again, due to these continuing waves of the pandemic, it is likely to have a sluggish growth as against an expected or an aspired growth of 24 to 25% by the industry. It is probably going to be around 15-16%, and it is likely to reach about 100 billion by the FY 26. And if the industry does not pick up, or if the world sees another major wave of pandemic towards the end of this year or probably next year, then the revenues might come further down to probably 85-90 billion also. Similarly, the exports, it's a fact that India is being gaining prominence as an export hub for many of the MNC OEM associated auto component groups, and that again created an aspirational target of 80 billion by 2026 in the AMP. However, for the same previously said reasons, the industry was able to achieve only a 15 billion in 2021 as against a targeted or aspired 40 billion, and by the 2026 it is likely to hit about 35 billion as against the 80 billion that was aspired. Now there is a bit of a silver lining as compared to the overall industry sales for the auto components industry, because there are some specific segments which are likely to have a higher opportunity areas or specific geographies that the industry can target for enhancing its prospects as against a possible slower maybe achievement of less than 30 billion, which I anticipate. Okay, so I have elaborated about those opportunity areas in the subsequent slides. Let's see them. Great. So these are the data from the ACMA annual reports for the FY 2021. Currently, the largest segment or the segments contributing to the industry share are engine components, drive, transmission, and suspension and braking. So predominantly these are the traditional segments, the traditional component segments which Indian auto components industries have been associated with, largely feeding into their sometimes parent OEMs or the long-term associated OEMs, and that is a very limited number that they are associated with right now. So they're dependent on the orders that these OEMs provide and their growth plans as against the industry or the company's individual aspirations, probably that it can leverage if a broader perspective is gained. Now, even in this scenario, due to the shifting dynamics of the vehicle, the design, the structure, or other trends, there is going to be a slight shift in the segments, and the notable among them is to be electrical and electronics, which is likely to become, a big segment, almost equivalent to the largest segment, which again I'm anticipating for multiple reasons. Um, within again this electrical and electronics, the largest share is likely to be contributed from the electronics segment. And I have a few observations from the industry trend, which I've noted here, like the rising penetration of infotainment and ADAS and diagnostic or vehicle monitoring systems, which are expected to drive the growth of this electrical and electronics, especially the latter segment. Then we are increasingly seeing that there is a very defined consumer preference, being developed in India to have better comfort vehicles, interiors, better interiors, as well as growing awareness and desire for the safety features. The recent government mandate to have up to 8 airbags in the passenger vehicles that are having larger capacity, and the previous implementation of minimum 4 to 5 airbags in each passenger vehicle have created a distinct awareness in the consumers, and also in terms of the improving lifestyles, as well as the usage of vehicles for longer drives as against just the urban short distance mobility by the previous generation of the Indian vehicle users, has turned the vehicle interiors and safety aspects into a key area of the preference or selection criteria. So those things are likely to add growth for this segment, and make it a prominent growth area or opportunity area. In terms of the industry activity, there is a conscious effort by a few larger players, but probably the smaller set of companies need to follow them, and then the major shift will be seen. So the industry is likely to shift from the low value activities towards higher value activities, and that is likely to cause a shift in the share of the traditional segments like the engine, as well as the drive, transmission, etc. Right. So key growth drivers, again, we all know multiple factors. Broadly, the sustainable growth in the domestic market, as well as increasing exports, etc. But there are a few initiatives from the government side that are likely to have a profound impact on the growth of this industry. So the PLI policy, the production linked incentive policy, which the government has announced for various industries. Within that, the auto components industry is likely to gain significantly. So what we have seen is any companies which are investing between 500 to 1,000 crores and achieve sales of above 1,000 crores are likely to gain prominently by in the range of 10 to 12% of the tax incentives from the government side, or that can be leveraged by the players. And I definitely believe that whoever is currently tentative about investing in India are likely to definitely take up their decisions in a very accelerated pace, and come into action in the next financial year. Then the FAME 2 policy, again, a revised perspective about how to go electric in India, from the government side as well as from the industry side, and also from the consumer side. Until 2 to 3 years back, adopting electric vehicles in any segment was observed very skeptically, both by the consumers as well as the industry players in India, due to the practical challenges of the charging infrastructure, the cost factor, their support, service infrastructure that can be provided by the vehicle manufacturers. So a lot of things were not clear, and the existing one or two companies, in both the passenger vehicle as well as the two-wheeler segment, were having a very limited presence. They were trying to focus, or probably do some test launches kind of efforts in select pockets of metro cities. So it was not visible across the country. However, now we can see there is a distinct clarity that yes, India can go electric, driven by the two and three wheeler segment. And almost all the metro cities and probably the top 10 cities are having initiatives both from the vehicle manufacturer side, government side, and also the acceptance factor from the consumer side. So that is going to be very helpful. Then the government is also looking towards organic shift towards electric vehicles, if possible through the hybrid electric vehicles. The hybrid engines policy also was recently announced by the Honorable Transport Minister. So that kind of a organic shift initiatives from the government side are likely to help in terms of the industry growth and create opportunities for the auto component sector. Then the semiconductor ecosystem program, which is recently launched, it's a great boon for the auto component industry, because directly or indirectly, almost 15 to 20% of the semiconductors and chips and other activities feed into the automotive industry, and probably the auto ancillary industry put together. And definitely, this industry is likely to benefit because of the program. And which is where I am saying, if the companies, especially the large ones, and probably the no legacy startups, can focus on this segment and achieve distinct growth, visible growth in the next 2 to 3 years, it can create a spiraling impact or a big wave of growth from this program for the auto components industry. And then we are again seeing that increasingly the global supply chains have been altered due to the COVID pandemic, and the global OEMs are looking for more safer and stable multiple basis for exports of or sourcing of their products. And India is one of the most likely destinations or options for them. And possibly the government is doing its bit, but the industry has to actually step up and lap the possible opportunity emerging out of this situation. Then another initiative from the government side, the vehicle scrappage policy, which was introduced last year. This is again going to create a good opportunity, because we all know, it has been very difficult, and it has been a nagging issue about disposing old vehicles in India, with multiple lakhs or loopholes in the regulations. Old vehicles have been plying on the roads, and with this policy and with a definite framework, I believe all the 15 plus years vehicles, and even before that, unfit vehicles will be retired from the roads, and it is likely to create an additional 4 to 5% growth for over and above the existing possible growth for the auto components industry. There are a few challenges. Yes, there was anticipation from the automotive OEMs way back in 2010 to 12 period, that we might be hitting a 5 million vehicle market by 2020. And if we see, we are still below 3 million, somewhere about 2.5, 2.7 million vehicles being sold last year. So the growth of the domestic market, which can actually be the primary source of opportunity for the auto components industry, has been slow. So this is a challenge, which the industry needs to probably bypass, and look for larger, or more options of growth. especially opportunities from the export market is one thing we need to look at, or extending into the high value segments, like I mentioned, is another option we need to look at. So different things have to be done, to reduce the dependence on the large dependence on the domestic sales of the automotive OEMs. Then we all know that again there are some regional preferred trade groups or agreements are emerging in ASEAN, Middle East, initiatives from the China side for the BRI and other things. Then in Africa, Europe, the changing dynamics after the UK's Brexit. So these equations are creating some challenges for the Indian auto component companies, while the same challenges actually can be converted into opportunities if the industry works intelligently, by probably joining as a special partner in such preferred trade groups, or creating some bilateral trade agreements, exclusive bilateral trade agreements with the most prominent nations within those trade blocks can be a growth driver for the industry. So turning challenge into an opportunity is definitely possible in this case. And another major challenge that the industry is tied up is higher dependence on foreign partners. In many cases, the OEM subsidiaries from the overseas are the dominant players in a joint venture with the Indian auto component company, and the local partners are heavily dependent on those foreign partners for technology and other critical components. So even the domestic manufacturers we have seen, like the Mahindra or Tata, they have been in difficult times for almost 1.5 to 2 decades, despite impressive growth from the foreign players like Suzuki, Hyundai, and others, because of this dependence on the foreign partners. So there needs to be a conscious development of innovation and R&D and domestic ecosystem for creating such technology or solutions, or self-reliance within the country, or growing self-reliance about the high value as well as the critical components for the automotive OEMs within the country. And that can probably create more opportunities for exports also. Thus the industry can benefit by again turning this challenge into an opportunity. And like I mentioned, there has been numerous companies in the country existing for several years or decades, but they have been stuck with the low value activities like the casting, forging, and stamping, which have not seen major innovations and value addition in terms of the market value or the revenue growth. So it's more like you are trying to play the volume game, and somebody if there is any other low cost country which can come and offer a lower labor cost and other incentives, so we'll have to fight with such countries in again both the domestic market, because the OEMs are notorious enough to get such lower cost components from those countries like China, and use it. So the industry needs to actually up its game by moving away from these low cost activities or low value activities into the high value component segment. So what are the high growth opportunity product segments? So like I mentioned, electronic components, like the chips, semiconductors, sensors, ECUs, we know these are increasingly being adopted in every vehicle. There are chances that an average vehicle will have at least 100 plus ECUs by next 5 years. So similarly, there are sensors, numerous sensors are used for various applications for interior, exterior, and other things. And we know chips are used for various processing activities in the vehicle. So all these pose a great opportunity, and Indian auto component industry must try to gain expertise as well as foothold in this market at a global level, and definitely for the domestic market fulfillment. And similarly, electric vehicle components, this includes batteries, BMS, the battery management systems, the motors, the charging equipment. We know it's all the critical components, and most of this is currently imported and used by the OEMs. So there is hardly any local ecosystem, except for probably doing assembling, the final assembling and labeling of the imported equipment. That's actually not likely to be sustainable. We have seen similar kind of activity in the mobile devices industry a decade back, and how in a matter of 5 years all those players were out of the market because the foreign companies who are supplying to this market and in a white label can come and set up shop at any point of time, through the investment or the foreign investment mode that is already allowed in the auto components industry. As we can see, almost 100% of FDI is allowed in this sector. Similarly, infotainment and vehicle connectivity systems. So there is a growing awareness and need also for the infotainment systems and also the vehicle connectivity systems for the navigation or the vehicle tracking and other activities. So almost all vehicles, which probably previously we did not have such kind of features in entry level and even mid level variants offered in the country, but this has become almost like a bare necessity in all the upcoming vehicles except for the entry levels, and sometimes even in the entry level vehicles also. So the component companies must utilize this possible opportunity. And then ADAS and vehicle safety systems. So we all know ADAS, as companies are trying to move towards greater help to the driver, and also the autonomous driving technology shift, and all the other things that are associated with vehicle safety in this process. So the more we move towards autonomous driving activity, there needs to be higher setup and the systems that ensure that the vehicle safety as well as the passenger safety is taken care. So all such kind of devices like the cameras, radars, lidars, airbags, these are all going to have a higher opportunity as we move forward with the industry growth, and the components industry must try to leverage that. Then we are again seeing increasingly a greater adoption of the lightweight metal components and the composites molded components. Sometimes these the components, the composite components replacing the erstwhile metal components like the crash guards, or even the supporting the bonnets closures, back doors, interiors part of the vehicle are largely replaced from metal to the composites. So there is going to be a growing need for these things, and we need to ensure, or the industry needs to tap more into this segment. So in terms of the vehicle segments opportunity, yes, at a broader level, the passenger cars represent the largest share of vehicle sales, but within that, we are seeing there is a rapid growth of SUVs, MUVs, or MPVs, as somebody calls it, and then the crossovers. This is the segment that is witnessing a rapid growth, and probably it might grow even further in the coming years. So the components industry should be focusing on this segment. If there are any specific components, whether it is higher graded infotainment systems, or a larger number of safety equipment, or the larger body equipment, or more strong structures and frameworks, etc., that are required into this. So all of these things needs to be observed and understood by the component manufacturers and focused on. And again, we are seeing that India is steadily moving away from a very entry-level car-oriented or country into a premium hatchback vehicles preferring nation, even for the entry level. So this is an area that Indian auto components industry must make note of, and if they are largely stuck or dependent upon the low value components meant for the entry level cars, probably they should upgrade them to suit this segment. 2 and 3 wheeler vehicles, we have been a success story all along. The country has been a success story in this segment. Very strong growth, high innovation. There are global players who have written success stories across continents, and domestically, it's more like a lifeline for our personal mobility. So it is going to be a sustainable segment, and the industry must adapt to the changing trends. There are innovations. There are different styles. More premium bikes are coming. Premium scooters are coming. Electric scooters are coming. So a lot of innovations are happening in these 2 and 3 wheelers. 3 wheelers, again, India is probably the largest manufacturer and exporter of this segment. And we need to maintain this trend. The industry OEMs are trying their best to retain their leadership, and the components industry must support in the possible way by providing the best possible components to them. Coming to electric vehicles, yes, there is an encouraging growth of electric 2 and 3 wheelers market, which actually has emboldened the rest of automotive industry to dream for an organic and definitive shift towards electric vehicle adoption in the country. So this needs to be made note of, and the component industry should be ready with their investments and products. Like I mentioned previously, all the components like the batteries, BMS, motors, especially the motors is a high value and volume segment. And similarly, the charging equipment, now the government has also allowed to install the charging equipment in residential complexes, as well as to create roadside charging infrastructure shops in the coming years. So there is going to be a lot of demand for such segments. We need to be prepared. And then light commercial vehicles, again, India has been forefront in innovations within the segment, adapting them for different applications, both for the passenger, cargo, and specialty applications, and resulting in which the domestic sales as well as exports of the segment have been steadily growing. So the auto components industry also should be aligning its product portfolio to match this high opportunity segment. In terms of export markets, like I mentioned, there is a steady growth in exports, and the dynamics resulting from the COVID-19 supply chain disruptions are likely to help India along with a few other nations, but India can definitely try to make the most out of it if the industry acts decisively. So what we are likely to see is, yes, Europe and North America are still likely to be major markets for the exports of Indian auto components industry. However, the share of fast developing nations within the Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America is likely to grow if we see the kind of a trend or the kind of efforts that are being done by the industry at present. And these are definitely a potential area which the automotive industry, auto components industry also should be focusing on, because the overall growth in the developed markets like the North America and the Europe, the Western Europe particularly, has been stagnating over the years. And what we see there is largely a replacement market, and that does have its limitations. Whereas the developing markets in Asia Pacific or the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, whether you name it, like our neighboring Bangladesh, or very culturally relevant Indonesia, or Vietnam, and in Africa we are seeing a rapid growth in countries like Nigeria, Algeria, Morocco, and revival of automotive and other activities in Egypt. So these kind of new markets or the developing markets, and also the automotive manufacturing initiatives from the GCC countries like Saudi Arabia. So these definitely have to be closely observed and leveraged by the auto components industry for a higher opportunity growth in future. Okay. So that was my perspectives about the industry, outlook and opportunities. And I would like to hear if there are any questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Manda. Very good session. I'll just open up the Q&A session now. We've already received 3 questions, so I'll just start asking them. Mr. Rakesh Malik has asked, current 28% GST rate is deterring the competitiveness in the Indian auto component industry. In the new 2022 budget, do you think the government will revise the GST to 18%?
The question is slightly tricky. You're asking about the government decisions. See, I'm also a very passionate propagator of reducing the GST and auto components industry, because overall, the automotive industry and the auto components industry adds a lot of value economy, and any support from the government side to lessen its burden or the tax burden will encourage more companies to come and expand the horizon. However, for probably the best known reasons for the government, it has kept this industry and the components in the highest tax bracket. I'm assuming, I mean, again, this is not sure, but I'm assuming there could be some revisions, favorable revisions for the tax structure, maybe in the next budget, because what I understand, in this year's budget, the government is trying to manage the affected finances and try to maintain or bring back the equilibrium in the industrial environment. And so it might not do a lot of experiments in terms of the tax structures or other things. So that's the reason I understand they are doing that. Other incentives like the PLI or the semiconductor policy and such alternate measures, maybe depending upon the electoral equations or some things, there is a possibility of such things in the next year's budget, probably 2022 or 2023.
Another question is, automotive industry is witnessing disruptions due to the pandemic, new technologies and regulations that are redefining the new mobility. To encourage R&D spends and investments to acquire and manufacture new components for the e-mobility market, what are the trends you foresee?
So like I mentioned, the pandemic has severely affected the overall manufacturing activity, the sales and other things. But what we have seen is the revival phase, in both the phase, after the phase one or the first wave or the second wave of the pandemic into later part of 2020 and 2021, there was a drastic growth in the industry performance. So it actually means that there is demand. Actually there was more than expected demand for the personal mobility and the other vehicles, that people were also surprised. And I was also part of a study, at a global study, which found that there is a huge growth of the luxury vehicles in the last 2 years, and it is likely to continue for the next 5 years, as compared to the broader stagnation of the automobile industry. So this kind of a shifts are happening in the industry, which the auto components industry must observe and understand, and then focus or refocus their energies in such high opportunity segments.
Great. The next question I'd go on to is, what initiatives and policies are required to facilitate India's emergence as a new hub for auto component manufacturing? Or just adding to this is the China plus one strategy as well.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there are many OEMs which are having a serious thought about, not just China plus one, but probably China plus two kind of plans also in their drawing boards. One particular thing I felt, again, this is a personal opinion, and there was a high prospect of India potentially becoming that China plus one, the one in that equation, when the pandemic first wave was happening, and the immediate aftermath of the pandemic first wave. So, but observers like me, and I don't know, majority agrees it or not, but the opportunity was not fully leveraged by the government as well as the industry to grab the maximum possible pie in that plans, resulting which we have seen many organizations have taken a easier and probably a safer route to shift their operations or open additional operations in the neighboring countries of China, like the Vietnam or the Indonesia, which I don't know. I mean, they might not be the better bet than India, because we have a much more well-established ecosystem, a larger market, and higher technical capabilities and intelligent workforce. So somewhere something did not happen because it was not acted upon swiftly, both by the government and the industry. So maybe a significant share of that momentum and opportunity is lost, but whatever is left off, maybe we can still try to build on that, and maybe later on take ahead the growth from those destinations.
Great. I'll come on to the last question. It says, how relevant will be emerging e-commerce platforms or auto component industry in expanding domestic and export business growth? Any thoughts?
I think most of the automotive OEMs as well as the component companies are trying to create some kind of a virtual channel for their products, especially for the spare parts and other things. And we all know there has been a decisive shift of the OEM tier 1, tier 2 supply chains towards the electronic communications or the ERP networks, where the vendors are closely integrated into the OEM activities. So the tier 2, tier 1 and OEM, the factory or the pre-manufacturing interface is private to them, and it is almost there in most cases. But what we are particularly seeing right now is the interface with the customers, particularly for the spare parts and other activities, is likely to grow. And it's also in the interest of the companies to make it more aggressive and visible, because in India, we know, there is a huge impact or the challenge of the counterfeit parts, the spurious parts. Customers don't know where to get them. Sometimes the service dealer also does not stock a required part. If the vehicle is 2-3 years old or sometimes 5 years old, you'll have to run around 2 to 3 dealers, and sometimes you'll have to wait for multiple weeks and a couple of months also to get a desired product or desired component when your vehicle requires fixing something. So these kind of things can be definitely avoided if the auto component companies can create user friendly or customer friendly virtual platforms, the sales platform, support platforms, wherein the customer can actually come, place the order directly, find the required part. And obviously, the component company in its larger mother warehouses might be having somewhere the stock of the desired component in any part of the country, so they can do the logistics better and send it to the customer. Whatever the shipping additional cost, the customer will be definitely willing to bear, as compared to the the delay and the potential loss of opportunity he might be facing without a vehicle for multiple weeks. So they need to focus on it. Coming to the vehicle retailing aspect, I'm not very sure. There were a lot of initiatives from the OEMs to create virtual vehicle experience platforms, virtual driving kind of a things. But at least for probably next 5 to 10 years, well, the vehicle is still a prized possession of customers. So you would like to actually go see, feel it, and experience actually being in the vehicle, how it feels while you're driving and being seated. So this virtual thing might still be more like a I would say advertising type of interface for the vehicle retailing, but definitely we need to do something aggressively in terms of the aftermarket and the sales service part.
Okay, thank you. We just have one question. While this was covered in your discussion, if you could just briefly share your thoughts on this. The question is, any observations on the growth prospect for heavy duty vehicle components in India, such as electric buses, metro and railways?
Metro and railways, see, there is a growth prospect, but what do you say, the volume of such segment is relatively much lower as compared to the mainstream segments that we are looking at. If you are looking at the pockets of broader automotive industry, yes, there are a good opportunity areas like the construction and mining equipment, which is likely to see a very big growth in the next 1 to 2 years due to various initiatives from the government, aggressive push for the road construction and other infrastructure projects that are taken up, and then also the private construction activity like the real estate, commercial, residential projects that somehow got stagnated in the last 1-2 years, and then all that pent up demand is likely to come up in the next 2 to 3 years. So there is going to be demand for such segment. Similarly, there is likely to be demand in the heavy duty segment related to mining and other activities. We know there's going to be again renewed licenses and other revised activities that the government is trying to offer to the private players for different mining activities. So that is likely to cause demand for mining related equipment like the tippers, dumpers, etc. So these kind of things are there. Purely the heavy duty segment buses, again, there is two ways about it. While there is a known fact that the required number of buses versus the actual available buses from the public sector undertakings that are controlling the public transportation in the country is definitely there is a gap and there is a huge demand for buses, but they are not taking up or not ordering the buses. So even though there is a likely demand existing, but it is not being realized. And whatever the electric buses and other things that people thought will be taken up in huge numbers are proving to be only very tricky things like one state government taking up probably just 500 buses or 1,000 buses in a year probably doesn't create such a huge opportunity for the component industries to bet big on them.
Great. So thank you very much. I think we're done with our Q&A session. Such an insightful and engaging session and a privilege to hear you. I'm sure our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end and I've taken them several nuggets from today's conversation. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the very end and for always sharing excellent questions.
Thank you, Gautam. And I really thank Blue Circle for this opportunity, and also all the participants, like you said, who had taken time and joined this session as well as stayed until the last. I observed we had 27 participants and we are still having 27 participants. It's really honor to have all of them to be hearing about my perspectives and being part of this discussion. Thanks again. Thank you everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you and stay safe. Bye-bye.